For over half a century, humans have endeavored to make business a force for good. But is the movement working? Or is it time to explore a new path forward? Welcome to Less Talk, More Action. We are your hosts, Joel Caesar and Owen Barrett, experts in clean energy, net zero real estate, decarbonization, and entrepreneurship. In each episode, we ask provocative questions and share stories from the front lines of sustainability with leaders in science, tech, and business taking real action to design a cleaner, better future. Thanks for joining the conversation. Now, let's get to work. Welcome to Less Talk, More Action podcast. My name is Joel Caesar, the world's undisputed voice of building decarbonization. Joining me as always is Owen Barrett, the self-proclaimed Adam Newman of green building. Today's guest, Becca Timms, the founding principal of Ultreia Advisory, where she helps investors, developers, and companies navigate the complex landscape of sustainability, ESG, and impact strategy. Man, Becca was in our wheelhouse, described herself as a doer, presents herself as someone known for cutting through the bullshit in the world of commercial real estate, ESG, which we need more of. So I enjoyed it. What'd you think?
Yeah, man. 12 years in the industry. She's a wealth of knowledge. I think two things stuck out to me. The dollars first mentality, which I always talk about. Like, that's just how our industry needs to think. And then also, she said something about how ESG people have to get out of their silo and really be a part of a business, which I think is so important too, because it's easy to get stuck. Whether it's ESG or not, it's easy to get stuck in your silo, but you really do have to kind of cut across all departments in order to be successful.
It's great advice for anyone trying to be in this job field, in this industry, is you can't just be an environmental expert. You got to know your company's business if you're going to be effective, for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, before we get into all that with Becca, let's dive into a segment we're calling Ideas for the Future of Corporate Sustainability. So, in our intro to the podcast, you hear me say we, as a species, as an industry, we've been endeavoring to make business a force for good for a long time now, but is it working? Do we need a new approach to the movement? So it's definitely a thesis I think a lot about, and it's kind of around this messy world that you and I operate in and tend to make fun of, that we're just all reporting to too many frameworks and counting emissions in different ways, and it's just leading to a lot of inaction and money and resources going to the wrong places. So with that said, I want to ask a question here of, instead of net zero, which had a good run, maybe is still having a run. I know there's a lot of companies and a lot of industries still using that term and still moving forward with their plans to achieve their version of net zero. Instead of that, would be better off having companies, governments, people even committing to preserving land, preserving oceans. And I thought about this. I was actually watching there's a great new nature documentary. It's on National Geographic. You can get on Disney Plus, where it's about ocean, and David Attenborough is the moderator, and they show this incredible footage of ocean trawling and how awful it is. They've never gotten this footage where they put a cam on the bottom of the trawler and watch it just desecrate the bottom of the ocean. And he talks about there's a lot of terrible stats about the health of the ocean in a lot of different directions: overfishing, ocean acidification, the bleaching of the coral reefs, many problems that are happening, the destruction of the top of the food chain, animals in the ocean. And, like you and I both know, we love the ocean. We met in Santa Barbara as surfers. It's really core to my heart. And it led me to think, it's hard to get people inspired around net zero, around counting emissions, about saying, I'm this percent better than my 1990 carbon emissions, and now I'm just counting scopes one. Nobody cares. It's just never going to inspire a movement that you need to get global change. But watching a documentary like that last night, and then he talks about we would never let bulldozers destroy the rainforest like we let these trawlers destroy the ocean. So in both those scenarios, you can get mass adoption around these ideas, but obviously, it would then lead to new frameworks and ways to comply. But I don't know. What do you think?
That's what I was thinking, is what framework's getting paid off this idea. That's the problem,
less talk,
right?
The less talk, more action.
No, I think it's interesting. I think unfortunately, like you nailed it. It's really hard for people to get attached to CO2 emissions. Like they're so important and they cause so many issues, but it's not tangible. And I think if companies, organizations had more freedom and flexibility in how they pursued sustainability, I think ultimately it'd probably be better off for everyone involved.
I
Um,
agree. The way you just said it, it's kind of like when people hear this podcast or hear me talk or have the ideas I have, they're always like, "All right, well, what's the alternative? What do you want to do?" And I'm like, I don't know. I want to kind of burn it all down and see what else we could build. And one of the ideas is what you just said. Like, we're at a moment where information is so readily available, and do we need these third-party trusted frameworks to like verify that companies are doing what they say they're doing? I don't know. Like maybe they're just causing a lot of
why
more
is that?
waste.
Yeah, or why are we so stuck on those targets? Like, why isn't it acres preserved or, similar metric for some ocean preservation? I mean, I think it's an interesting concept. I do think people would get more attached to it. Like, it invokes more of an emotion than let's decrease our emissions by 30% from 1990 levels. Like, it doesn't really impact anyone that's not in the sustainability space. I feel like people don't even really know what that means.
Have you heard of this idea? They talk about it in the documentary, The Decade of the Ocean, that we're in the middle of it right now.
No, I never heard of it.
I guess it was a United Nations initiative in 2021, so they called the 2020s the Decade of the Ocean, and the
Dude, but like
idea is
that's part of the problem. Why do we need to like proclamate these decades and these days? Why don't we just like
well,
fucking do something? All that, like, get a company that just really cares about the ocean and just focus on ocean preservation. Don't care about emissions so much. But you don't need a decade for the ocean. Like,
I guess you say that, but this caught my attention. I was like
yeah,
watching
but
this
what happens
documentary. I
when
was
the
like, oh,
decade's
Decade of the
over?
Ocean.
Then you stop caring
Yeah,
about it. You're like, oh, now I got to pay attention to the decade of the rainforest. Like, come on,
that's a good
just stick
point.
to what you care about. Whether it's you or a company, like just stick to that and just spend your life, your time, your money trying to do that one thing. And it's okay if it's different than the rest of the industry.
Well, what was awesome about the documentary was they explored a lot of the concept of the marine protected area, and you and I saw that in Santa Barbara. It's kind of
Yeah.
one of the more famous, successful marine protected areas. I think the Monterey Bay is another. In the show, they celebrate this area around Hawaii, which is I think the largest protected area on Earth, like ocean or land, and how incredibly successful that's been, not just for like the ecosystem around its boundaries, but what happens with the nearby areas because the fish are now thriving within that area, and of course they just they're not bounded by the boundaries of a marine protected area that humans established. But it's like, okay, so all this money that companies, these big tech companies and big governments and everyone at Davos and the IPCC and all the money you and I talk about, like imagine what else you could do with that money.
Yeah.
Like what if we established more marine protected areas that were paid for by private entities?
Yeah. I think it's a great
And
idea.
it probably would have the same impact on emissions, actually.
Well, you start protecting the kelp in those marine protected areas.
The
There's
kelp and the
no,
mangroves. Totally. Yeah, it's all true.
there's no stopping it.
All right. Well, stay on the lookout for the Less Talk, More Action framework on corporations committing to marine protected areas, and we'll take your funds and
We'll
implement
take
them.
5%.
Well, that was fun. Now let's dive into our conversation with Becca Timms. Joining us today is Becca Timms, the founding principal of Ultreia Advisory, where she helps investors, developers, and companies navigate the complex landscape of sustainability, ESG, and impact strategy. Becca brings over a decade of experience at the forefront of ESG in the real estate and private equity sectors, including her time as head of ESG at Jamestown, where she led the firm's sustainability efforts across a $12 billion real estate portfolio. Known for her practical, business-focused approach, Becca has worked with industry leaders to integrate ESG considerations into investment decision-making, operations, and reporting, helping to unlock long-term value while advancing positive environmental and social outcomes. Her passion lies in translating big-picture sustainability goals into actionable strategies that align with the company's core business and culture. With her unique blend of technical expertise, market insight, and a clear-eyed understanding of the challenges and opportunities in ESG, Becca is a trusted voice for those looking to create impact, without sacrificing performance. So, Becca, welcome to the Less Talk, More Action podcast.
Thanks, y'all. I'm excited to be here.
Very impressive background. Very cool guest for us. You lived and continue to live in a world that we both also operate in, sell to, have sat in your shoes. So this will be a very organic discussion about the opportunities and challenges of a very interesting industry. But before we get into all that, we start our guests off with the same question. How are you taking action to make the world a better place?
I think right now I'm willing to work with anybody, even the people that think it's all bullshit. And I think a lot of that comes from my thesis just in general, that if we're going to do this, we have to make these solutions something that everyone feels like they're a part of in some way. And so I think right now in this stage in my career, it's opened up some interesting conversations. But really, when I think back, this kind of, being willing to collaborate probably comes from some like childhood trauma from my family. And, I found myself in somewhat of like an activist career in many ways. A lot of people find out I do environmental work and they think, I must work for a nonprofit or something like that. But I've had a lot of fun and found a lot of success, really aligning doing the right thing with making a buck, which, at the end of the day is all companies really care about, I would say, most companies.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's something that's echoed on the podcast all the time, is how important it is to align sort of the impact with the dollars. Otherwise, nothing gets done. But
especially how that's changed recently.
Yeah. That's what
not changed, but it's definitely been like sort of swung back towards, wait, we all have to always remember that's how to operate here, right?
That's what my first question was going to be, is 12 years in the ESG space, which 12 years ago, ESG didn't really exist. Like, what specifically were you doing for 12 years? And like, where did it start versus where is it now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in some ways, it's like my average kind of like annual cycle or calendar, like didn't change a ton, but we kind of leveled up along the way. So when I first started, I inherited a bunch of really crummy Energy Star portfolio manager accounts. I was so jazzed to like have some real buildings and some real data. And then I started like looking into the details and realizing like, well, this is total garbage. And, we didn't actually, at the time we just had, like an administrator helping out, entering the bills. And so really quickly, I saw some of the challenges of taking kind of like a building by building approach and scaling that up to kind of the portfolio or the fund level. And at the same time that there were these kind of like technical data needs or like internal systems and processes, there was this whole policy landscape. And that's what I studied. I studied environmental policy. And I'll take a step back. I come from a family of physicians. Like pretty much my whole entire family is, doctors or nurses. And when I told them that I wanted to go, after my undergrad, when I told them that I wanted to go get a master's in sustainability in the Netherlands, I mean, I think, my sweet grandmother was like terrified that I was going to be unemployed forever. And so I would basically, they either thought I was like a summer camp counselor, like teaching environmental education, or one time at a cocktail party, I heard my mother tell someone that I did like environmental remediation, which like nothing against that. It's part of the landscape. But I always kind of had this constructive criticism, I think, around me. And so I was always looking to like plug in solutions that work for everyone. So I forgot what we were talking about specifically. Oh, we were talking about Jamestown. Yeah, so I started.
Doesn't have to be Jamestown specific. I know you as someone who's very involved in the industry at large, so you might be able to answer this question with the hat of like commercial real estate, private equity, sustainability people, leaders.
Totally. Well, and that's what's so interesting, because when you talk to folks that have been in the trenches, we all do kind of have a very similar story. Getting the data straight, aggregating that to the portfolio level, and then really figuring out how that layers into the policy landscape and what your stakeholders want. So in commercial real estate, that's typically, your investors, your lenders, your tenants. But what's so wild, and I think the snowballing that I've really seen more recently, is just, when you get into like different deal structures, partnerships, even specific tenant deals, you're also dealing with all of their stakeholders. So you're dealing with their lenders and their investors and, their partners. And so I kind of developed this like you can run, but you can't hide attitude about it. And I really made it my business to, make sure we knew the boxes that really needed to be checked, but then we're also actually getting projects done and moving the needle on the performance. Because you're asking like what I actually did, Owen. Like in the beginning, it was like convincing people to recycle and, setting up just really basic stuff. And I would say over time, it was similar activities, but like with the data example, we moved on to more sophisticated software that had other features, or we actually started submitting that data not just for compliance, but we got it proactively assured to make sure that it was correct. And I think like on the corporate side, and Joel, I'm sure you agree with this, like it's tough for people to admit it's uncomfortable that like this is a work in progress and that it's not perfect. And, if your gas meter broke at one of your, 20,000 buildings, like that might be something that they catch a couple years down the road if you, missed a data input or something like that. And so I worked a lot on transparency and just getting people more comfortable with like how to work with the data and what it means. Because I don't know about y'all, I glaze over a little bit when folks are talking about like big carbon numbers. My brain just like doesn't.
Oh, you're in the
I don't
right
think
crowd.
anybody. Yeah, I don't think it works
the
for
two
anybody.
of us are maybe too extreme to ignoring that part of the industry.
But I think that's part of the problem with the industry, right? Is like so often we talk about tons of CO2 and blah, 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 like metrics that nobody, even in the industry, can grasp.
It's
so why would we
esoteric.
expect people
is that
outside
good?
of the industry?
Is that a lot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like if we're being annoying to ourselves, you know what I mean? Like I can't say I blame like, some of the late night hosts and stuff that have taken jabs. But, at the same time, I also think that there's like so much, like, frankly, the work and sometimes can be so easy. And so, right now I'm really thinking about, what were the levers that I had to pull in my prior role? And what were the scenarios where I felt like it was easier to get things done or harder, and why, right? Like, was it a certain jurisdiction? Was it related to a specific tenant? And so, what I'm doing now, Ultreia Advisory, is really like my attempt to be somewhat of a matchmaker. I've sat in so many panels and conferences, and it's like how to sell lighting projects to your CFO. And it's like, my CFO, at the time, like, wasn't really that in the weeds, And so I think, like, I've always tried to just help, like, demystify. And, I think having these conversations is the best way to do it. Because when you really open up the hood, like, a lot of us are grappling with the same issues. Whether you're the landlord, the tenant, whether you're on the corporate side with big goals, or you're just trying to comply with whatever your local law is. Like, I think there's a million ways to get there and actually see improvements. And so I'm trying to find, how can I basically scale what I have done, formerly at Jamestown, and have more impact through other verticals, other industries.
Well, not to have you answer this question from your former role, but we're going to hit the provocative question. I think Owen's probably thinking too head on here, which is like the two of us definitely are critical of the industry, if you call it that, sustainability professionals, especially in commercial real estate, orienting towards spending most of their time, a lot of their time, too much of their time with the various reporting frameworks. And us coming across in various roles we've had where we've been trying to sell actual energy reduction technologies, implementation projects to folks like yourself in a previous role who would tell us, great, looks good, ROI, all makes sense, great track record, but I'm in reporting season, so come back to me in 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's like, let me just ask you again, not to address your specific role, because it sounds like you were probably someone who was like not caught up in too much reporting, but I know we've both seen the people and the companies that are. Do you think the industry needs to rethink that part of the game?
100%, but I will say I've definitely told people that, and sometimes it was just because I didn't want to talk to them. And the worst was when they would
maybe
come
that's
back.
why I hear it so
now
much.
that's why we hear it all the time.
Well, and
It's
they'd
just
be like,
like the
well, if
go-to
you're busy with
excuse.
See,
reporting,
we needed Becca to come on here and set us straight.
they'd be like, well, you wouldn't be so busy with reporting if you use my project, or product, which I would obviously have set them up for. But no, I mean, it's a real thing, right? Like it's easy to spend the first kind of half of the year reporting on the prior year, and then the second half of the year kind of in this budgeting scramble to get stuff done. And I gotta say, like, I'm the first one to be critical of overly aggressive salespeople and like pretty pitch decks without a lot of substance. And so I think that there's a role on both like the vendor side, like the buyer and the seller side, to know what you're selling, know who you're selling it to, and why they need it. I mean, the thing that would frustrate me, like, if I had a portfolio in a region that didn't report to GRESB, for example, the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark is what it used to be called, but now it's called, what's the proper acronym now? It's called GRESB.
Yeah.
And I would have all these pitches that were all focused on GRESB, and it just so happened that that particular fund didn't even report to GRESB. And, it sounds silly because GRESB has evolved a lot, and a lot of those same data points that you might submit to GRESB are relevant for other purposes. But I think like really understanding what your product is doing and how it's helping is important. And
but is GRESB important? Do you think the industry needs GRESB? Let's put you on the spot.
I think the industry needs something like it. And I think if GRESB is also doing their job well, which they're a very receptive organization, I think that gap between what we check the box with and what actually helps drive projects will continue to get smaller. So I will say that I was spending less time and money on GRESB after, going through the motions and getting real smart and lean about it. But that takes work, right? I mean, I was like holding up this like, kind of like shadow org of like consultants and software providers at the corporate level, sometimes at the fund level, sometimes at the property level. And so it's just very nuanced.
You just needed Cambio. I promised we weren't going to give our own company pitches here.
Oh my God! This whole podcast is just going to start into a.
This is the first time. This is the first time I mentioned Cambio. I think Owen's pitching his company all the time on this podcast. So
well, one thing I will say is that like the reason that I'm having fun right now doing what I'm doing is because it's allowed me to like continue conversations with companies that I was working with prior, meeting new companies. And I feel like, I like to think the reason that salespeople like me is because I'm, close enough to the details to like really know if something's going to work or not. And so, I like to say that there's very few like totally horrible like products. I mean, there are some, but it's more like they're not really chasing the right buildings. And so, I would commonly like refer multifamily focused products to other folks, or a lot of these like Cambio. I think, Joel, like I would probably tell you, like if I was buying a bunch of buildings at once or I needed something really fast, that's probably right where I would have gone, as opposed to like a standing portfolio of a couple hundred buildings that I knew really well and already had a ton of like data and reports and progress on. So I really do think that there's a lot of room in this industry. But I think we need to start getting smarter quicker. And I think a lot of the breakdown is just kind of shitty data. Like, I mean, I got on a surprising number of sales calls where folks like wouldn't have even like Googled the portfolio that I was representing, or you know what I mean?
I don't want to take Joel. And you're gonna jump in, but let me real quickly, because this is something that's important to me too, because it's like it's related to the job I'm in now, Becca, which I'm in my title's growth lead. I'm in sales, biz dev, go to market. You might call it different things, and it's a newer type role for me. But I saw the same thing that you did while I was at Google, being sold to, a lot of times being like, that's actually a cool product, but man, that presentation was awful, and they're never going to convince the other people in the room. Or, the last company I was at, we were selling and selling different parts of our product, and there was definitely situations where I watched us fumble the pitch, and we could have saved energy. We could have helped low-income people, it's an interesting. We've heard another theme on this podcast has been thinking we have a lot of younger audience here, and tell them try to advise them on what to do with their careers. And I would add sales to this recommendation because, yes, it really is important that we have smart, capable people out there being due diligent, like you're describing, Becca, and applying their solution to the right end user and articulating it well.
Yeah. And sometimes, like, my old team, we would use the phrase like frictionless and delightful. Like, that's what we wanted our tech solutions to be. And, like, I think all of us, I mean, we're in our like 9 to 5s. It's like sometimes I just ask myself, like, am I being frictionless and delightful? And, I would feel like such a hag sometimes with these vendors, right? Because, like, I wasn't trying to be a gatekeeper, but, I think what I've continue to do and what I'm doing with Ultreia, which, by the way, Ultreia is a pilgrim's greeting from the Camino de Santiago. It's a pilgrimage across well, there's a couple of them, but this one, the one that I did was the one across the north of Spain, and it just means like onward. It for me represents like continued progress, but also doing that like in this kind of communal spirit. I mean, I know I'm getting like kind of hippy dippy, but I think the more you can kind of expand your network and get comfortable enough to like get the real story from folks, I feel like that's where you can become, the person that somebody picks up the phone and calls when they need something or they've got a challenge. And so I think like when I think about sales, which is certainly not my favorite thing to do, I've started to kind of refocus and think about it more as just like socializing, which I guess I'm decent at.
You just sold Cambio about 10 minutes ago better than I have yet. So I think you're doing great.
Well, you can hire Ultreia to help develop. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, and I know y'all have talked about this on some recent episodes, but even for myself, like, I might go work for another company one day, but what I was really realizing is that, being somewhere for 12 and a half years, even if that exposed me to lots of other different, tenants and investors, and I felt like Jamestown was the perfect kind of launching off point for me to really get a better idea of what interested me, where I thought my impact could be the greatest. But when I think about like what I would do now for my own career development if I were just starting, like, I think y'all might have talked about this a little bit, but it's sometimes like the non-sustainability grunt work. Yep. I mean, my first job was at a local municipality. I think yours was too, Joel, one of your first jobs. And before they even hired me to do building permits, I was an unpaid intern, like digitizing all of the county records. And like, through that, I learned like how developments happen. I got to reread all the planning and zoning files. I mean, I wasn't the most efficient intern. I was like super nerded out in the file room. But like, for me, that gave me so much perspective. And, being beat up at the permit desk by, greedy developers for a couple months, and then going to work for a developer and, kind of seeing the other side of it. I think that is one of the most important kind of parts of my career were those early days. And, I think that's probably not what excited, students like ready to save the world want to hear. But, my best like interns, employees were those that were willing to like roll up their sleeves. Because I do think the devil is in the details when it comes to like the data needed to get the real work done, right? Like, it's all the super unsexy stuff that allows you to like properly underwrite energy improvements in a building, right? It's like, it's the really, really like, how old are your fans and how many of them do you have? Like, I don't know. It's stuff that people aren't like super excited to spend money on like aggregating. But when I think about like what's next, to me, like the best investment someone can make in their sustainability initiative is really into like how their data is organized around their buildings, if they want to do something at scale.
I got two questions. I got two questions, or we can just go a different direction altogether. I have a question about ESG, if we want to go back there, or I'm more interested in this matchmaking that you're doing now and what exactly that means. So you let me know which direction you want to go.
Well, I think quickly on ESG, because I mean, sustainability.
Well, let me ask the question, because I'm just going to come out. Joel and I have had this question for a while, and I'm curious to get your perspective. What would happen if Jamestown and every other big real estate company just didn't report next year? Just said, we're not doing it. You just said half your time was used on reporting, half your year, which is a crazy stat if that holds true across the industry. So every, top 50 real estate company just says, fuck this, I'm not reporting this year. Does the world crash and burn, or does it just keep on going, and it's no big deal.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought it up because one thing that comes to mind is stability. And so, it's GRESB is a signal. It's a signal that investors take really seriously. And so I would want to know for someone that has, hundreds of millions of dollars, or someone who manages a fund that has hundreds of millions of dollars, I'd really want to know kind of what they say, right? Like, I think one of the things that I've lobbied to GRESB for is like GRESB should be aligned with the regulatory landscape. So, for example, whatever decarb, levels are required for a certain municipality, like you shouldn't be able to get a perfect GRESB score or score well for a building that's, out of compliance with all the local laws because you've got, some certification, like as an example. And so I think like, I said you could spend half the year, right? Like that's kind of how the calendar's set up.
Or
but
he said, and I guess when he said his answer is like, there's two options you said, Owen, which is one, what if we didn't, or does the world keep going? Isn't door three, we don't do it, or we spend way less time doing it, and that gives our team, Becca, much more time and resources to focus on better things. That's, I guess, the angle we keep coming back to is this like, it takes too long. It takes too many resources.
Yeah.
Too onerous.
In a perfect world, like GRESB would be just like any other investor relations questionnaire that those teams complete, right? Like those teams do surveys all day in and day out, right? And so, and they take a lot longer as time goes on. That was my experience, at least. And so I do think, not to cop out on your question, but like, I do think the answer lies somewhere in the middle. There's a structure and like a diligence that it provided that I do think, it allowed me to learn things about my portfolio. And I think the exercise of measuring is really important. And when I really think it, like how I was able to get budget to measure, which does cost money typically, especially if Energy Star, ends up, getting privatized or something like that. It's like, I don't know, like there's a cost to it, but I think if you're using that information for something else, then it's not as egregious to me.
Well, I think we're going to try to have someone from GRESB on, Owen, and I mean, let's be real. My company, we benefit from GRESB being there. Cambio tries to make this whole process easier, and that's great. And I know you said they're receptive at GRESB, and so I think we can all imagine and acknowledge there needs to be some recognized scoring system that we all use that investors can understand, that everyone can get streamlined around, right? Great.
Right.
So I think you're not copping out of the answer. I think it's somewhere in the middle is another way of saying it. Like, let's get better. Let's all get better at this.
Yeah, I think about like gap accounting, which people have like fucked up for years in terms of like manipulating it and spinning the numbers in their favor and things like that. And like, we didn't throw like gap accounting principles out of the window. Like, I think it's because like decarbonization can be, seen as like such a kind of virtue signaling thing. I think people can be really hypercritical of the data, which is important. But, a lot of folks that are putting out reports, like my favorite thing to do is look at who was putting out reports. Were they using real data, or like, were they using estimates, and like, were they even reporting on their actual performance? That's where I think stuff gets interesting. But I suspect we'll see a big shift in all of that messaging over these next couple of years.
So Owen,
is that just double clicking on that? Do you think there's going to be a shift? Yeah, you think there's going to be a shift because of the administration, and then is there going to be another shift in 4 more years?
No. Let me just before she jumps in and answer, because we had a pre-call about this. And I just want to highlight the term you used. What did you say, Becca? You said to me, I took note of it somewhere. Oh, our industry is having a reckoning, which I think is not so political. Like, we all keep pointing to this administration as the thing that's doing this. I think it's bigger, broader than just the administration.
Yeah.
But so do you think there's going to be a pivot back? So you just think we're sort of normalizing the ESG space? This is
the reckoning. Let's Becca
and
tell the world what the future holds.
Well, okay. Actually, I quoted this. I listened to one of y'all's other episodes driving up to a ULI electrification event, talking about electric kitchens and building all electric communities with a bunch of developers in Charlotte. And it was a great discussion because we had developers that were building electric residential developments and like building all electric townhomes with great induction cooking stuff, like just because that's what the market wanted, right? Not because it was a sustainability thing. And I think y'all said like you shouldn't be arguing about water heaters like with your uncle at Thanksgiving or something like that. And that's kind of how I feel about it, right? Like it's like I think there's so much kind of like tribal association when it comes to these topics. And like I've just never subscribed to that. I want clean water, I want healthy air for my kid. And so, for now, like summertime especially, spending a lot of time at home, like I'm really just trying to kind of localize everything that I'm doing and, humanize it a little bit because some of these things, like they're not truly political topics. And so it seems silly attaching them to that. That's one of the reasons I like to focus on the dollars. I think with the Inflation Reduction Act, just as an example, there's a stat where a majority of those dollars were spent in like red states or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think I want to come back to stability because I think the thing that like worries me the most right now is that all of this instability, whether it's through like tax incentives or policies, I mean, we're seeing potential weakening of policies in the European Union, certainly with like SEC stuff that people were expecting that's probably not happening. And so even back to the sales thing, right? I'm still being pitched stuff where it's like, get ready for these European regulations and make all these investments. And it's like, okay, I don't believe you. Like, I know you're
help
not.
Your team make their 2040 net zero goal. Yeah, newsflash, that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I'm like, I think like people sometimes are like, I don't know. I mean, I'm probably the other extreme, right? Like, I'm probably too aware of like the counter arguments, but I do think there's something to be said for like kind of knowing where you sit in the broader landscape. And so, yeah, I mean, right now I'm really focused on the dollars, but that's a little bit difficult right now because of all of these policy uncertainties and funding uncertainties. And I think that's hard to ignore.
Yeah. Yeah. We're in the same boat. I don't know, Joel, if you are or not, but I mean, the world of solar is just like anxiously waiting to see how this bill unfolds so that the whole industry can just react.
Yeah, I mean, stability is well said. I think we're selling a software product, which is less maybe capital intensive as your product, Owen, but still, right? These teams have budgets and uncertainty definitely goes to the sustainability team's budget first and says, let's pause and wait to see what you guys are going to spend last.
Right.
Well, we don't have much time left, but I feel like we haven't talked enough about Ultreia. Maybe Owen was getting to that question. Owen, you want to ask it?
Yeah, well, you said something about matchmaking, which I thought was really interesting. Like, just can you elaborate on that and how you're approaching it? Because it seems like a big need in the industry.
Yeah. I think it's like we were talking about Grez, for example, and I think it's so easy to get siloed, right? In like your own product category or your own industry. And so Ultreia's goal is really to connect and frankly monetize, my passion for connecting people that are doing cool stuff. I live in Savannah, Georgia, but I've worked out of Atlanta and kind of other major cities for the last decade. And so, I think through essentially like fractional sustainability leadership, which is another kind of trend right now that I think we'll see more of.
I do too.
Yeah. I want to be the trusty sustainability person that can help people that don't believe in climate change save money, right? Like I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and work with anyone that's like, hey, I'm truly open to exploring these solutions. But I think in terms of the matchmaking, it's pulling solutions from different categories. So like, an air quality focused company that's, working to balance indoor air quality and energy use, or, your kind of more traditional automation system based building control technology, or, a company like Cambio that really lies in, helping to kind of quickly scale and deploy solutions and, assess portfolios. And then even on the solar side, like, the specific model that I used at Jamestown was pretty unique. So, I'm looking around in this like, kind of sub-market without as many, large corporate landlords. And again, coming from a medical family, I'm like, how can I help medical office building owners, like my dad who has his, office building that he built the year I was born. So, I'm going into it with an open mind. And I think the other thing, Joel, is like, the large tech companies, every little kind of industry has their own like sustainability rating or, their own way they measure. I think that's the other interesting thing is like how, a company like Google might judge a real estate company, right? And I know that a lot of these tech companies are actually real estate companies, and I know a lot of real estate companies really just like want to be tech companies. Um, but I think there's a lot more collaboration that's going to be enabled, frankly, by software and data. And when you think about it, like everything that Cambio does, it's really like information that's held by a building engineer, most of it, right? Like that's probably like your best source of information. And that individual like probably doesn't even work for the landlord, has no association to the investors or the lenders or any of these other stakeholders. And so another thing that I'm interested in is like figuring out the workforce side, like who can understand the programming aspect of it, but also manually adjust a damper, or you know what I mean? Like kind of who knows the analog and the digital. I feel like that's another space that I'm trying to figure out.
It's really smart. Anyone, I've been on the owner side as of you. I've been selling to owners. I've been a contractor. I know Owen's worn lots of hats here. So much of the challenge often is translating your solution across those entities. So if you can be bringing that like cohesive, here's the group I think comes together as one voice, sounds like Ultreia Advisory's got a nice future.
I've done so many shitty demos, Joel, that I might as well like share what I've been through. No, I'm half kidding. But no, I think it's fun. Plus, it allows me to talk to cool folks like y'all and have conversations about what people are doing. And again, it's like I consider it positive peer pressure, right? Like no one wants to be the loser that's like sitting on the bench not doing cool stuff. So I think for us, I'm like, I'll say like sustainability creatives, especially those of us who have made it, kind of further in the industry and, have the political capital to kind of speak up. I think it's a really important time to be disciplined about this work.
Becca, I was really interested in hearing about the matchmaking because I just got back from this conference in Miami where it was like speed dating with building owners. So a bunch of vendors set up their booths in a room. And then all the owners kind of went between the tables to learn about the solutions. And we were the only solar company there. It was a lot of like traditional building materials. But I think the ESG, sustainability, clean tech side of real estate needs that because there are so many cool solutions that most owners just don't know about.
I thought the same thing recently. I want to maybe start doing this on LinkedIn. Maybe this will be a good driver. I was laid off from my last company in late August and then did some consulting. And I thought a lot about fractional, just sustainability officer, Becca. That's why my ears perked up when he said that. Yeah. But during that time, the coolest part of it was very grateful. I got to interview with a lot of cool companies. Yeah. Jobs I didn't get or, for whatever reason didn't work out. But like, hilarious. Yeah. I saw from the inside, I'm like, man, I could really, this must work. You guys are crushing it. I feel like I want to start posting just about these great companies I've saw because I agree, Owen. Like maybe Owen says this a lot on this podcast. Like maybe we as an industry are a little too timid, especially on social media. Like people aren't. You said it too, Becca. Political capital. Like once you get to a certain point, we really should be weighing in more and like sharing more to get the solutions out there.
Yeah, I think, look, this is like nerdy shit, right? Like the devil really is in the details. A lot of owners like don't even, like if you just picked a random real estate executive and said, how many buildings are in your portfolio? How many square feet are they? Like they have no idea, And I think, I know how y'all are going to want to wrap this podcast up. And so one thing that I'll say is
we're getting close.
Yeah, so. I think, for the sustainability folks, like it really behooves us to be like part of the business, right? Like not extra, you have to know the business. And in your case, Owen, like if to be kind of, I don't know, I guess this is a little too much for a matchmaking date, but I like to jump in quick. Okay. I guess maybe I'm a stage 5 clinger. I'd show up for matchmaking with
let's get Owen matchmaked.
Here's all my data, right? Like here's all my roof ages. Like here's, all the information you need. And I think that would cut so much time out of the equation, right? So like instead of like multiple meetings to demo the product and, blah, 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 it's like, what I envision is really like a data package that I could kind of take to market and shop around with the solutions providers and like just consolidate this process that is not very efficient for
Yeah.
anybody, frankly.
I agree. Joel, I think we should think through this matchmaking, this speed dating for the Less Talk, More Action conference.
Let's talk more action.
Are we
Summit.
doing a conference?
Yeah.
I think
gonna-
we're
We're
this
gonna
is
hack that
the
whole
foundation
mess
here.
of an industry too, which is us getting in rooms and talking about the same bullshit and the same.
We don't need to talk
channels.
about anything. I think people need to learn about solutions, and then we need to have a pitch competition for startups. That's
Or
it.
no, I told you my idea where if you pay, let's say you pay $1,000 to go to a conference, right? We all have done that. And where does that go? Go to a nonprofit that hopefully is doing good work. But what if you spend $1,000 and actually you're going to get that on a debit card or some kind of solution, an app, and you go and invest. You go around the room and you get pitched. You're like, oh, I'll give you 100 of my dollars or 100. So like
That's so fun.
the less talk, more action. Really, like we're not taking your money at this conference. It's your money.
Yeah.
You're gonna go deploy it.
Sign me
Well,
up.
but
I'm down. Owen's like, no, I wait.
We somehow this conference has to get paid for.
Well, no, we haven't workshopped this that much yet. We'll get a cut. The less talk, more action entity will get a small cut of every investment, right?
Did you know how profitable these conferences are? Like what they trade at like 8 times revenue when these things sell. It's wild how much money this whole conference industry is.
Yeah,
I think
I know that.
I'm
I mean-
with you. Like strip it out, make it basic, and just deliver a ton of value.
Not to bash Gresb again. Again, we love Gresb, but it's like, who's making all the money in this industry? The conferences and Gresb.
Oh, well, sign me up
on
for
that- yeah.
the Let's Talk More Action conference.
You'll
I'm from
be-
the South.
you'll be-
I'm the hostess. I love to.
I was gonna say you'll be head matchmaker. We're gonna have
Yeah.
a prominent role for you.
Exactly. No, this was really fun. I appreciate it.
Well,
We haven't
on
even
that
got to the
note-
last question yet. You're already
Yeah, we're
bowing
getting
out.
there. She knows it's coming.
I know
All
it's
right, all
coming.
right.
I'm prepared.
We got a regular listener here.
Yeah. I love how she's quoting us too at the ULI conference. Keep it going, Becca.
I mean, I'm a road warrior, so like I listened to all of them recently. But remind me, okay, I've forgotten of like the specific question. What is it?
All right, here it comes. In an industry that often gets caught up in negativity and maybe too focused on the bad news that's happening around the environment, we like to keep it optimistic here. So, Becca, what gives you hope for the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much great stuff happening. I like any place where I can come together, and experience my community. And so I'm doing that a lot lately through like farmers markets and going to spaces that make me feel good. And then, seeing that in practice and, really trying to like practice what I preach and being able to find things to enable that. Has been super, super empowering. So I'm, really grateful for all the work that's happening across like the various industries that are supporting this. And frankly, I don't think that any of this work should be limited to people who give a shit. I think it should be something that everyone feels empowered to do from a monetary perspective. And I think it's on us to set it up like that.
Well said.
Very well said. Becca, it's been a pleasure. We thank you for joining. Owen, thank you for being here as always. Well, Becca, first of all, how do we find you? Ultreia Advisory website, social media. I follow you on LinkedIn. What's the best way to follow your journey?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Ultreia Advisory is the company, and you can find all the other links on there. But yeah, I'm happy to connect and really appreciate the conversation.
You got it. Well, thank you, Becca. Thank you, everyone, for joining. You can find Owen and I also on LinkedIn, usually actively antagonizing the more talk, more complaining sustainability crowd. You can find this podcast and more great content at letstalkmoreaction.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends. And until next time, we encourage you to ask yourself, what are you doing to take action to make the world a better place?